The areas that we need to focus on to build a future of work that works for all, particularly when I think about learning, reskilling, upskilling, and also health and well-being. All the different sectors need to come together in different ways. Business, government, academia, not-for-profits. How we collaborate, how we co-create, how we learn together, how we experiment together, and really elevate ourselves to leadership at a higher level, at a country level, will be critical, and I think will probably be the key, one of the key determining factors of whether or not we can build a future of work that works for all.
Hello and welcome to the Ivey Academy webinar. My name is Gerard Seijts. I'm a professor of organizational behavior and leadership, and I'm also the executive director of the E&O Inatowicz Institute for Leadership. This is the sixth installment of a series of webinars that I help to facilitate, and it's important to me personally to have a series of conversations with Canadians who fight for business, but also those who play a key role in helping to shape our continued evolution as a country, and importantly, to help facilitate well-being in society. So this afternoon, I am joined by Zabeen Hirji. Zabeen is currently the Executive Advisor, Future of Work at Deloitte. Now, I met Zabeen more than a few years ago when we were part of a working group around persistent youth unemployment that was put together by Civic Action, a not-for-profit based organization located in Toronto. And Civic Action brings leaders from the public, private, and the not-for-profit sector together to tackle persistent problems in the GTHA. And so they try to build a better city by involving a great number of leaders, again, from the public, private, and the not-for-profit sector. Zabeen also has an Ivey connection. Years ago, she received a prestigious award for her activities in the human resources management. So, Zabeen, welcome, and it's very good to see you. Hi.
Hi, thank you, Gerard. I'm delighted to be here.
Excellent. Zabeen, first of all, thank you so much for taking some time to connect with us. I know that one of your passions these days is to think and provide thought leadership around the future of work. I think a critically important question, but certainly an important question as a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think that has crystallized the importance, of course, in the aftermath, the high unemployment, and certainly, shall we say, with the Black Lives Matter movement as well. Zabeen, I have a long list of questions. Before we go into that list, perhaps I can ask you a personal question first. For the past 11, 12 weeks, how have you been? How's your family doing during these very challenging times?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Gerard. And, I think like many people, you adapt. And so we are doing well. I have to say, though, my daughter just graduated with her master's in social work, just got her degree a couple of weeks ago. It arrived. And I'm really proud of her because she made the decision to get right into working in the front lines and as a healthcare worker, and really feels that this is an opportunity for her to really help those who need it most. So that's my mother pride coming through right now.
Outstanding. Zabeen, the first question is a lengthy one, so let me provide some context. So currently you're at Deloitte. As I said earlier, you're an executive advisor around the future of work. Of course, you bring a wealth of experience through your corporate career at RBC. For the past 10 years, or the last 10 years of your tenure at RBC, you were the Chief Human Resources Officer until 2017. Now, more recently, you have been sharing your thought leadership, your insights, experiences with businesses, organizations in the public and the not-for-profit sector, with universities, governments, boards, etc. A common thread through all your thought leadership is this notion of inclusive prosperity through human capital development. And so, in a recent interview with Forbes, you stated that, and now I quote, that we have been thrust out of our old models and ways of working, and we have reached this point without planning for it. So here's my first question. What are the key trends driving the future of work, and how might they be changing as a direct result of the pandemic?
Thank you, Gerard. So as I think about the key macro trends, three things: technology, demographics, and societal expectations. So let me double click on those. And I would say that overall, the pandemic has really been a time machine to the future of work. And so all of these trends have aspects of them that have accelerated. So number one, advances in technology, automation, artificial intelligence, something everyone is very familiar with. And if we just stop to think about during the pandemic, how much has changed, let's think about healthcare, for example. Prior to the pandemic, 80% of visits were in person. During the pandemic, 40% of visits are actually being done in person. That's something we could never have imagined happening in decades, and yet it happened in a few weeks. And I know certainly for myself, it's made things very easy. I don't have to commute to go somewhere. I don't have to expose myself to not just the COVID, but just in general to other medical and transmittable viruses that are out there. And so the other one really is online shopping. I certainly know it's hit my pocketbook because I've become quite active in that space. And I was, in fact, talking to a grocer client just yesterday who said that their 3-year target for online shopping was reached in 3 weeks. And so I think that some of these consumer behavioral changes will actually continue. We may roll back but this is a trend that's here to stay. And so while on the one hand, I think people sometimes feel that there will be a pause on automation because of the economic conditions and businesses preserving capital, I think we will see that certain investments like digital, the use of data, will actually accelerate. And so the impact of technology on jobs that we've been talking about will also accelerate. The second trend is demographics. So diversity in many contexts. Let me speak first about generational diversity. We have 5 generations in the workforce, from Generation Z that's just entering to millennials, who get a lot of, we certainly have talked about them and talk about them a lot as we have more of them in the workforce. But one of the elements of that I don't think we talk about enough is mature workers. And what we know is people will work longer. They'll work longer because they have to or because they want to. And I think that COVID will probably extend those that are going to work longer because they have to, just because of the economic impacts, the impacts on people's retirement savings. And with this longevity, longer life expectancy, and the addition of COVID, we certainly are going to see that trend. And organizations and institutions need to be better prepared to help mature workers learn and reskill to be successful in this new environment. The other aspect of diversity is gender, certainly. Today, 48% of the Canadian workforce is female. And what we do know is that in terms of job losses, women have been impacted more. We know that women are already underrepresented in many sectors, underrepresented in leadership. We know that automation is projected to have a disproportionate impact on women. So what are we doing again collectively to ensure that that the progress that's been made is not only sustained, but that we continue to build the representation of women? And the third area of diversity, in this category that I would speak about, is just broader diversity. So racial diversity, cultural diversity, ethnic diversity. Canada today is about 20% of Canadians are members of a visible minority group. That's expected to be 30% in the next decade. And so the storyline really here is organizations need to get really, really good at inclusion. Diversity is a fact in our country. Inclusion is an act. And organizations, if we're not able to do that, we won't be able to attract and retain the best talent, but we won't be able to also achieve inclusive prosperity. So it's both the right thing to do and the smart thing to do. The third trend is around changing societal expectations. So we see all stakeholders, customers, employees, communities, and even shareholders, particularly institutional shareholders, really looking for organizations to have this overarching commitment to profits with purpose. And so if I bring that to the employee perspective, they want to work for organizations that are socially responsible, that are having social impact. And what's also happening is employees have more agency. They have more voice. And we see that pretty much every day in organizations where employees will stand up and say to their employers, we've seen that a lot in the tech industry, that I don't want you to do business with certain groups, or I want, and they are able to, they have the confidence, and social media makes that very possible. So what does that mean to organizations and the kinds of what they're doing, but also what they're enabling their employees to do in this context of social impact? So that was a bit of a long answer, but it really covered
it's great. Yeah, it's great, Zabeen. There's so much in there, I think, for all of us to consider. I think one of the things that stood out most for me was your saying or quote around diversity is a fact, and inclusion is an act that really resonates. Zabeen, you are the executive advisor. You work for Deloitte, and so let me push you a little bit on kind of the next question here. Deloitte is in the client service and advisory business. What's Deloitte advising its clients? What is Deloitte telling the organizations that it's working with about the future of work, the commitments that they ought to make? What's going on? What do you hear and what do you see?
Yeah, terrific. That's a great question. And what I find interesting, while we've been saying for quite some time that the future is now, I think for many people and business leaders, pre-COVID, there was still this sense of, well, we've got lots of time, but now it's very clear. And last week, in fact, I had 2 sessions with Deloitte clients who are CFOs of both private and public companies, as well as private and public sector. And it was very interesting to me to see how engaged they were in this conversation. And contrary to sometimes what people think, it was not a conversation primarily focused on dollars and cents, but the recognition that human capital is actually critical for all organization success. So what are we talking about? In terms of automation and artificial intelligence, really the conversation is around how do you build this human-machine collaboration? It's not human versus machines, but it's how do we fuse the two together so that we are, humans are doing work that is inherently human, that's doing things that machines can't, and that machines are doing things certainly in many cases, the routine work, but they're also doing high value work. So, for example, there was some work done around MRIs, and artificial intelligence was actually able to do a better job of interpreting MRIs than radiologists. And so the story there isn't that they're going to replace radiologists. The story for me is that radiologists can actually play more of a role in interacting with patients, which, most of us never see our radiologist. And that message is passed on to your physician, and they don't have the same level of expertise in explaining that to you. So these human skills that we often talk about are really going to be required at all levels. So human-machine collaboration. And what I would say there too is we can't put ourselves in a situation of technological determinism. Technology is not going to decide how we are going to deploy technology, how we're going to use it, how we're going to, the time frame over which we're going to do it. It's humans that make those decisions. And I think that's an important fact for us to keep in mind, and how you consider it so that we're optimizing and really making that win-win. The second thing that's really hot these days is what I call the distributed workforce. Most people call it remote workforce, but remote work. I like the term distributed because for me, remote really suggests that there's this big center, this headquarters where all the action takes place and where careers are made. And then there's these outskirts, remote areas where people are doing their work. I think to reframe that, I prefer the term distributed work. And this is a statistic that really caught my attention. Mid-April, Stats Canada reported that over 5 million Canadians of the total 12 million working Canadians were actually working from home. So that's over 40%. And that happened. That goes back to the Forbes article that you mentioned. We didn't do a lot of planning for this. It was pretty much over a few days that this switch was made. You would have experienced it, Gerard, certainly at university, where you were close to the end of the year and you had to switch and get people through the year, and people graduated. And so that's a trend that I think is here to stay. And what's important for me is that it's done thoughtfully and it's done in a win-win way where employees and organizations win, and to find that intersect. Another area that I think has certainly, again, accelerated, and we are talking about a lot at Deloitte with clients, is mental health and well-being. You use that term in your framing. Well-being in society is about physical, mental, financial, social well-being. And for those who, it's the right thing to do, but for those who need the numbers, the costs have been estimated at $50 billion a year. 500,000 employees or workers a week are unable to work because of mental health issues. So there is a huge business case. But it's really if you think about the lost potential of this human capital, and so how organizations are supporting it. And, it goes beyond just benefits programs. That's table stakes, but it's about a culture. It's about creating a culture that's empathetic, that's caring, and that also normalizes mental health. And as Catherine said last week, the CEO of CAMH Hospital in your interview, that mental health is health, and it's still treated quite differently. And I really see organizations stepping up their efforts. So many clients that I've spoken with have really focused on the well-being of their employees. And again, what I would say is that these issues are not going to dissipate. They were already there. And again, you would be very familiar that in the youth demographic, the growth has been even more significant. So how organizations really build that support into the DNA of their organizations will be critical to not just their talent agenda, but to the outcomes and their ability to achieve their business strategies. And the last one, I like to do things in threes, is really around reskilling and upskilling. So it was already a massive issue. A lot of reports out there. RBC did a report a couple of years ago that said that over the next decade, 25% of jobs will be significantly impacted by automation, and 50% would require significant reskilling. So whatever the exact numbers are, we're not going to know, but they're big. And so reskilling at scale is important. And you add to that the fact that our unemployment numbers were just out last week, 13.7%. We are going to have to work at helping people re-enter the workforce. And what I would say there is they're not all going to go back to the same jobs. We are going to see automation take place, digitization take place. And in fact, in the last 4 recessions, investments in automation went up. Because as companies build up, they really start to think about, do we actually change the business model, and automation becomes a big part of that. So the big things there: human-machine collaboration, distributed work, and really the work from home and office combination and blend, mental health support, and upskilling and reskilling.
Thanks, Zabeen. And actually, let me ask a follow-up question, because you talked a little bit about youth. You talked also about your daughter that just entered kind of the workforce. So hence kind of the next question. What advice do you have for students who will be entering the workforce, or those who will be entering the workforce soon? What can or should they do to prepare to work on a seamless transition into the workforce?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think certainly what I would say, and this is students that are youth that are still at school, is really this importance of, if you are in the STEM type of area, make sure that you actually get the STEAM, you get the A part, the arts part, and the lot of the human skills we talked about, and in terms of creativity and collaboration and empathy and resiliency, adaptability, and really building those skills, and vice versa. It's the same for people in the arts and humanities. Make sure that you get the digital fluency, understanding how digital and data can be used, because they certainly are used everywhere now today. And ideally, I think my message here to advanced education institutions is, how do you actually deliver your programs in a more integrated way? Because life is integrated. And so how do you programmatically do that? But one of the things that I've seen with these human skills, while organizations say they matter, they're important to us, it's hard to assess them. It's hard to assess them from what people have from universities, transcripts, and things like that. But it's also hard to assess in an interview. And so I heard somebody the other day call this proof of potential, and I really like that, which is, how do you, as a student, how do you take those experiences that you're having that are developing those skills and actually articulate them, visualize them, to be able to make it compelling to employers that these are the skills that I've developed. This is how they were developed, and that becomes the proof of potential that they're bringing forward. And it can be volunteer experiences, it can be job experiences, it's life experiences. It's all of those things put together. And the maybe the final thing that I would say, and it's certainly something that I did throughout my career, when you're looking at an opportunity, think of it as part of your journey. You're not going to get the perfect opportunity first necessarily. But once you're in a job, what I have found is there is so much what I call white space where you can do other things. You can pursue areas you're passionate about, in addition to doing your primary job. Managers and leaders love that. And it's a way for you to also differentiate yourself in an organization when you're able to step out and use some of those skills and pursue some of your passions, and think of this as a journey. And one of the things that's so much harder today because of social media is this. You start to compare yourself. Well, my classmate is doing this, and what's wrong with me? Judge your success by your own standards. Think about what are 2 or 3 things I'm going to get out of this opportunity, and make your decisions based on that, and then make the most of the opportunities that you get.
Maybe a follow-up. I like very much what you shared with us, but I think it's also not unreasonable to say that some of the graduates can be quite impatient. Promotion soon, yes. All of that. Have you seen you have a long and distinguished career in human resources management. Do you see a transition in the mindset of younger graduates, or is this something that still has to happen?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's there, and I also wonder. So when I think about myself, and I go back a long way from when I started at RBC, and in the first 20 years of my career, I think I had 13 jobs. So I was actually moving fast. But what I will say in the jobs that I had, I took lateral moves. I took a job at a lower level because I saw that all as part of the journey and what am I going to learn. So I don't know how much things have changed. I think what's different today is that the younger people will vote with their feet. They will leave the organization if they don't get those opportunities, and perhaps it didn't happen as much. So what I encourage them is to think about within a role, you can grow in your role. There's more that you can do. They like variety. That's what they're accustomed to. So organizations offering variety and internal mobility, I think, is something that organizations underutilize. And how do you get people out of new job, into a new job, new experience mindset, as opposed to it must always be a promotion. That is, and I think there's a lot of social pressure around that for individuals. But organizations are aware, and they work to give them informal learning as well, like mentoring and access to senior people to help them with their learning. Those are all things I think that ultimately make a difference.
Great. Zabeen, it truly has been an extraordinary 3 weeks. We all witnessed the Black Lives Matter movement after the murder of George Floyd, the demonstrations across the United States and, in fact, worldwide. We have seen many people voicing their opinions and thoughts, their reflections on race and racial injustice. Many people in the public, private, not-for-profit sector are wondering at this moment what it is that they can do to make a positive difference when it comes to social justice. And so any discussion around the future of work, I think, should include that conversation. And so obviously there is so much to say around that incredibly important topic. But in the limited time that we have, the few minutes, what advice do you have for business leaders? Advice that simply goes beyond a tweet or a hashtag or stating how committed they are to social justice and making a positive difference, right? So what's the one thing, again, that you see and that you believe is absolutely essential going forward and making a positive difference?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and I think I would start out by saying that certainly the events of the last few weeks have been they really have touched the hearts, I think, of many, including myself. And what's so important is that, as you say, we need to take action. This issue, like many that we've spoken about, is not new. It's really risen to the fore. I think COVID is in some ways a great reveal of many things, and I think that's what we're seeing here. And we see earlier, as I talked about societal expectations, how quickly there's a global movement around that. And in many countries, it's not about happening in another country. It's about happening in our countries as well. So I think taking action is critical. And I've been reflecting on this myself quite a bit in terms of what actions can organizations take and what actions can I take, because, as you know, it is an area that I am active, have been active in terms of building inclusive prosperity. And so here are a few things that I'm seeing and that I'm sharing with clients. The first one is around conversations, but we need to get comfortable with imperfect conversations. It's hard to know where to start, how to start. Am I going to misstep? And yes, I am. And so I try to frame that in the context of, I need to learn more, we need to learn more. And these imperfect conversations really happen at a human level, and they get to the heart. And that's, in my experience over many years, that's what drives change. You need to make that human-to-human connection, and you need to make that connection with someone you care about. When somebody you know and you care about shares their experience with you, there is a much greater likelihood that you're going to act on it, because it's no longer about someone else or somewhere else. The other piece is, as we talk about inclusion, and I talked about diversity is a fact, inclusion is an act. Building a culture of inclusion is a deliberate process. It doesn't just happen because we want it to, or even with the intentions. There, I think, is a great opportunity to use data. So most organizations do employee surveys. Those surveys can be cross-cut with demographics, with everything from gender to race, to ethnicity, to new Canadians, to ability, to sexual orientation. And you can get a lot of good data there around not just questions like, do you think that, does your organization embrace diversity? But it's looking at things like, how are they answering the questions like, I feel respected in the workplace? How are they answering questions like, I expect to achieve my career aspirations within this organization's vis-a-vis other groups? And to really use that information to take targeted action and to hold managers and leaders accountable, because culture change can happen. It takes a lot of effort, and we're starting to see more accountability around representation, which I will talk about in a moment, but much less around inclusion and inclusive cultures. And I think that is a step that all organizations can take. The representation matters a lot. People want to see leadership in all sectors, business, government, academia, not-for-profits, to be reflective of the talent that we have in the organization. I am a strong believer in establishing goals. I think anything that's important has goals, and we take the right steps to achieve those goals. People make good decisions, and I don't buy the, goals is going to force people to put in less qualified, unqualified people. Once you set goals in place, then you take talent actions to develop the pipeline, to make sure that you are doing everything that you need to, and addressing some of the systemic barriers that people in different groups face, and taking that action. So representation matters a lot. And for me, the final thing I would say there, because as you mentioned, I also engage with board directors. We've made good progress in gender representation on boards. It's still a work in progress, but we've seen significant growth. And I think that that has come from leaders and prominent, influential business leaders standing up for that, driving change, making those decisions. I think we need to see the same thing for diversity in leadership and on boards, with people who are part of, who belong to a visible minority group. And what I would add to that is visible minorities are not a homogeneous group. The experiences of different groups within visible minorities are different, and we know that the systemic racism that occurs also occurs differently across those groups. And we have to better understand that and take different actions in order to drive that change. What I would close this diversity conversation off with is that what I have seen in previous crises and recessions, that sometimes organizations will step back from their commitment and actions to diversity and inclusion and say, we have to make choices and we'll come back to that later. This is not the time to do that. If anything, as we talked earlier about the disproportionate impact on women and already underrepresented groups, requires us to do more. And we are certainly hearing through what's happening now that this is the time to act. So I would urge organizations to not only maintain their commitment, but to carefully and in targeted ways double down on their commitment in certain areas.
Well said. I think we're all very intrigued as to what will happen when the news starts to dissipate just a little bit and we start focusing on other issues. And will there still be momentum? And I think time will tell, but I think critically important. Zabeen, we have a few minutes left, and so I got a few statements here, and I was wondering if you could give us a quick response. Candid, provocative is always good, almost like a little bit of rapid fire, so to speak. So, any quick thoughts on the following? Maintaining employee engagement and a strong organizational culture will become a real challenge in the future with distributed work.
So I think it absolutely, I mean, first of all, employee engagement and strong culture will become more important in work. And with distributed work, it does add a whole new dimension. And which is why I'm a strong believer in a blended approach of office and home. Because some of this human beings are social beings. This is the way we've been forever. And so I do think some of that human will need to be maintained. But managers, I mentioned speaking to CFOs last week, and one of them said communication has become so important. And I set aside every day half an hour to have two conversations with two people on my team. So absolutely. And if I could say something on culture, we need to maintain our cultures, but we're also going to have to very dynamically change culture in order to really align to our strategy. So how do you change culture, never mind maintain culture, in a fully, in an environment where you're never connecting with people? So really, I think my message is that it's a blended approach that I think will work.
That's a great research question.
Yeah,
what is the future?
Absolutely.
I know. What does the future of work mean for leadership competencies? What do we need to drop? What do we need to add? What will become more important or less important in the overall leadership role?
Yeah. So I would say the acceleration of what Adam Grant has called macro management as opposed to micromanagement. We need to set the framework for people, the direction for people, and then let them go. That level of enablement and empowerment allows you to go fast, allows you people to be more creative and much more adaptable. Adaptability, we've seen resilience, the ability to pick yourself up from failure and move on, because we will see other significant situations. And inclusion, we've spoken about, and growth mindset. Lifelong learning is for everyone. It never stops, and certainly I experience it in sort of post my full-time, full-on career, that how important it is to be learning.
This one you will like. Companies must affirm the need for strong chief human resource officers to weather the COVID-19 pandemic and future pandemics.
So I think my answer would be yes. We've had CEOs have been for years, if not decades, saying people are our greatest asset. Our greatest assets go up and down our elevators every day, not so much today. But now there's no question that it's really about human capital. What we've seen in this crisis, it's the ability of people to come together, to work together, to make a difference. That's really been so critical to us. So I would say, yes, that function, the CHRO, the chief HR officer, and the HR function, for many organizations, it means really making also the right investments. I think it means giving, having the right people in the jobs, but also giving them the mandate to be able to drive the change. And we have seen, it's been wonderful for me to watch my previous colleagues across all industries really take on this leadership role and be such a critical piece in managing through the response through COVID. But now, as we get into recovery and into the next phase, really of reinventing and thriving, they have a huge role to play.
Thank you, Zabeen. Final question. What's your final message regarding the future of work to all those who are watching the recording? So what are your parting words?
Okay, so the future of work is human. Skills are really the new currency in the future of work. And so skills and learning truly needs to be integrated into work, integrated into life. It's not a once and done. And that is a responsibility that we have to take as individuals as well. organizations, institutions, governments, educators, universities all play a role. But for me, it's very much how health and fitness has changed, where you don't stop once you leave university. Trust me. In fact, the older you get, the more you have to focus on it. And lifelong and learning should really be very much the same. It's an investment in ourselves for us to continue to thrive. And the last point I would make there, which I think is super important, the areas that we need to focus on to build a future of work that works for all, particularly when I think about learning, reskilling, upskilling, and also health and well-being. All the different sectors need to come together in different ways. Business, government, academia, not-for-profits. How we collaborate, how we co-create, how we learn together, how we experiment together, and really elevate ourselves to leadership at a higher level, at a country level, will be critical, and I think will probably be the key, one of the key determining factors of whether or not we can build a future of work that works for all.
Excellent. Well said. Zabeen, thank you so much for the time you have given us. It's always great to listen to you and the insights you've gained through your ongoing research at Deloitte with your colleagues. So personally, I wish you a continued success, and I hope that at some point in the very near future, we're able to welcome you at the Ivey Business School once again, and to learn more and to engage in the conversation around the future for work. Thanks, Zabeen, and my very best wishes to you and your family.
Thank you, Gerard. It's been a pleasure, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about something that I think is key to building inclusive prosperity in this country.
Outstanding. Thanks, Zabeen. All the best.
Bye-bye.